Hello, pastors and leaders, and welcome to another episode of Spirit Anointed Leadership. I'm so glad that you decided to join us for this podcast in VCast, where we really pray that this material that we're giving you all the time will equip, encourage, and empower you to make a huge difference in the mission that we're on. Now, today's podcast in VCast is part 2 of a financial conversation that I'm having with my good friends, Andy Miedema and Dave Lutz. And I'm so excited they've agreed to join me again. And we're just going to continue a conversation that we started last time about how pastors can really get a hold of their own personal finances and how they can make huge strides so that you can actually live with peace, that you don't have to be freaked out. I remember so well every year, I don't know why this was, but before I got this figured out in my own life, maybe the first 7 or 8 years of my marriage, every year, I don't know why, but between Christmas and New Year, Mary would tell you, I went into a funk, and it was a funk about finances. It was a financial funk, and that's what it was. I just said, I'm doing horrible with finances, and I just needed a person who could come alongside and help me. And so we talked about that in our first podcast in VCast together, is that find that person. But now we want to continue the conversation today, and I want to start off by talking about retirement. Now, Dave, as you and I have talked in the past, it used to be in the Wesleyan Church discipline that churches were required or certainly suggested to pay 12% of a pastor's salary and housing into a retirement plan, hopefully with Wesleyan pension fund. But now that's no longer in the discipline. So it's suggested that churches give to a pastor's retirement fund, but there's no real figures down there. Mm-hmm. And so what I find, I don't know, Andy, but what I find is that a lot of churches give like 3 or 6%. And I just want to ask you, from your perspective as a financial planner and a financial advisor, do you think that 3% or 6% is really going to get it done for the long haul? What would you say about that?
Yeah, these are questions that are impossible to answer without full circumstances and knowledge of a personal situation. But I can give you some general ideas, which is no. It's not even close. Okay. The general rule of thumb is that we need to probably have between 10 and 15% of our wages going into a retirement account to fund that future need when we can't work. And now, if part of that comes from your employer, that can help. Sure. But it's also important to make your own contribution, one, because you've got control over that. Secondly, it also helps to restrain your lifestyle, which makes retirement more affordable. Yeah. And so it's probably worth putting together a plan to see what's a right number for you. Yeah. But I would say if you're not in that range of 10 to 15%, look really hard because it's probably insufficient.
Yeah. And I remember so well, I don't know why, this is kind of, I'm one of these work now, play later type of people. And so I remember when we were in our second church plant in Madison, Wisconsin, I went 7 months without getting paid. They didn't have enough money to pay me, my salary at all. But I begged them to keep paying money into the Wesleyan pension fund. Because my mindset back then is, my life sucks right now, but I don't want it to suck when I'm 70, right? And so, and I just have felt that way, most of my life. But Andy, you and I both know that with the Wesleyan Pension Fund, that you can go on there. One of the great things that was initiated way back in the year 2000 or somewhere around there was the fact that now pastors can really designate where their money goes. So we really have control. And what I find is that a lot of pastors just sign themselves up for the most conservative portfolio that they can have, investment portfolio in there they can have. And would you talk to us about that? What your thoughts are about that?
Yeah. I think when you think about retirement, you're really thinking about the long term, and you've got to take a long-term approach to your investment decisions. Certainly when you look at like where the stock market has gone in the last 12 months, and it's really scary because it's in free fall and you don't know where the bottom is, or it's going to keep falling. There's this tendency to want to get really conservative and put your money in something that's not going to lose its value when the market is down. But over the long term, that's a huge mistake. For most people, when they look at what's in their retirement account at the time they retire, the vast majority of the money that's in there is going to be earnings and growth, not money that they've actually put in there as principal payment. And so because you don't need to withdraw that money for your career, you have to be able to weather the ups and downs so that when the market recovers, you can take advantage of that. For example, if after 2008, when the market crashed in the Great Recession, if you had pulled all your money out, you would have missed on the 30% growth that you got the immediate next year, and in the subsequent years where the market kept going up and up and up. So part of it is understanding that the market does go up and down. You don't need the money in your 30s, 40s, or 50s, and so you've got to be able to weather that in order to get that return over the long term. One thing that I strongly recommend is if you don't feel comfortable with the market on your own, it really is helpful to have an advisor to hold your hand, to explain to you what you're doing, and to keep you from getting too scared and making rash decisions when the market is very volatile.
Yeah. And what I find is, and this may not always be the case, but I've got a guy in my life who is not a certified financial planner like you are, and he would be very, he wouldn't want me to give his name out, so I won't, but just a guy that learned about investing himself when he was in his late 20s, and just was really wise. And he's ended up been a huge help to me just to think about where should my money go in Wesleyan pension, where should my money go in my small little Vanguard account and that kind of stuff. He's just been a help to me along those lines. But that's exactly, Dave, what you do now for a living. Is there anything else that you would add to what Andy just said about as pastors think about their money either in Wesleyan pension or anything else as it relates to retirement and thinking for the long game as opposed to the short game? Anything else that you'd add to that?
The only thing that I would add, and I would just add on to Andy's comments, emphasize those to say, talk to people who can help you gain a perspective on what the market does, what to expect, what not to expect. It does have ups and downs, but there are some patterns and some long history that can give you a level of comfort that you won't necessarily have in the midst of May and June when it's down big time, right? I mean, it's how do you step back from that and say, you know what? I don't need this money for 20 years. And if I look at typical patterns in the market over 20 years, I'm not going to lose money. It's going to perform. And so get someone to help you gain that perspective.
That's awesome. And Dave, there are other plans out there, or there are other ways to invest some funds, like a 529 fund, a college fund. Actually that fund has kind of changed in the last 3 or 4 years. You can actually use it now, not just for college, but also for high school education, that kind of thing. So do you think that a 529 plan is smart? I know obviously it depends on the person, but in the situation, but what would you say about a 529 fund?
I think a 529 fund has some very specific advantages that in the right circumstances, you can take advantage of it. I do believe people need to play out their financial plan in a certain order. There's first a foundation where you get your consumer debt paid off and you build up an emergency fund to give you that protection so you're not whipsawed constantly. Then you start working on those long-term goals like retirement. What does that look like and what is that funding? And then you start to look at some perhaps shorter term, more intermediate goals, one of which is college savings. And 529, the advantage of 529 is if you use it for qualified spending, then the interest that you make on that account is free. You never pay taxes on it.
That's awesome.
Also, some states, Michigan is one of them, will give you a tax benefit for contributing. And so there's distinct advantages to putting money in a 529. You have to understand what the rules are, and because there's also, if you don't use it for college, there can be some cost of getting to the money. But it's certainly something worth looking at in the context of your overall financial plan.
So let's talk. I came to you, Dave, specifically, I can't remember, 7 or 8 months ago, something like that, because, I went through an experience where I'm wondering about long-term healthcare, like nursing home care. And I just, you get around some people and they just start, it's like gloom and doom, like, they're just going to wipe out all of your nest egg, in 3 months. And so you start getting, someone like me who, again, is ignorant about stuff, I start thinking, should I go get long-term health insurance, specifically nursing care insurance? And I remember coming to you, and you spent a little bit of time, and you ran some numbers for me, and you helped me to do that. Talk to us a little bit about those kinds of things, and how do we make not just a long-term nursing care like insurance decision, but how do we put that into a context of whether or not that kind of thing is smart for us or not?
Yeah, I think Andy's already talked about sort of the issue of risk and reward in the stock market, that yes. You can make money in the stock market and there's a certain amount of risk. And often those elements are correlated, that higher risk, higher reward, lower risk, lower reward. So if you put your money in CD, you're probably not going to lose it, but you're going to get 2 nickels. Right. And it is risk reward. There's a similar thought process as you think through insurance, which is to say, what is the risk of something happening, and how significant, how impactful is that risk? And should I insure it? Should I save to protect myself with my own money? Is there a different way that I go at this? Typically, when something is small odds, big cost, your house burning down. Right. That's a candidate to go out and buy insurance to protect yourself, and it's probably not going to be very expensive, right? In long-term care insurance specifically, when the policies were first introduced, they were far less expensive because the companies miscalculated what future costs were going to be. Okay. And people got a bargain. And that is not true anymore. They understand longevity. They understand costs. The prices have gone up. They've got the room to raise their rates. Sure. And it's a lot harder decision today, Chris. And the general context I would give you is that there's 3 categories of people, and I'm not going to give you specific boundaries, but 3 categories of people in terms of their assets, right? There are people that have very, very little. And in that case, you don't buy a long-term care policy because you really don't have that much to protect in the way of assets, and you'll rely on Medicaid to help you with nursing care coverage, right. Long-term health care. There are people who have lots and lots of assets, and quite honestly, they don't buy a policy because even if they have to go in a nursing home, they'll pay for it themselves. Right. Then there's that difficult middle. Yep. Where
most of us live, right?
A lot of us live there, where you have to ask yourself, what's the likelihood, what's the cost, and what's the policy going to cost, and can I continue to make the premiums? Because you can pay on it for 15 years and then can't afford the premium, and then you go in the nursing home and you're out of luck. Wow. And so in general, I'm a fan of, let's talk about what is the risk that you're trying to protect from. Life insurance, for example. Right. Life insurance, largely, this isn't universally true and there are special circumstances, but largely life insurance is to protect against early death before you've been able to accumulate sufficient resources to care for your family. Yeah. All right? Right. And so that's a situation where you can go out, you can buy a death benefit, and in the meantime, you can sock money away so that eventually you don't need that anymore. Right. You move to a different. So to me, it's always what risk are you trying to protect? How likely is it to happen? And how much does it cost to protect that? Should I do it or not?
Yeah, that's all really, really good. So there's so many things we could talk about concerning personal finances and that kind of thing. But is there anything, Andy, that's just burning on your spirit and your heart that we haven't talked about when it comes to personal finances? You just think, oh, we got to talk about that before we're done. Yeah,
if I would tell pastors one thing is that they really shouldn't feel as ashamed about their situation as they often are meant to feel. Again, you said in our last episode about how pastors feel like they always have to have it together. But before I had this job, I spent 15 years in commercial banking. I worked with business owners and multimillionaires. They don't have it together. They look like they do. Other people think they do. And it feels like sometimes we're all on this show making it feel like we've got it together. Underneath, 7 out of 10 people's finances are a mess. And so pastors shouldn't feel ashamed. Please, I implore you, if this is a struggle for you, please take some steps, meet with somebody, give us a call. We want to help you get on a plan.
And we won't judge you.
Exactly. Because we know that what you're facing is what most people are facing with their finances, which is trying to look like they're okay when they're really not.
And that's so you were a commercial banker for many, many years. You worked with multi-millionaires, at least on paper, but their own finances were a wreck. And 7 out of 10 people, that's the case. And that's just, I think, it's not that misery loves company. Misery likes to get out of misery. And so, you know what I mean? And so you have that opportunity, pastors and leaders, to get out of that. So I want to finalize our conversation by talking about this thing. Dave, you attend a church that did something that I'd never heard of before. And once I heard about it, I thought it was, oh my goodness, so big. And then you, Andy, as a treasurer of a local church, have brought this into being. It's called a sinking fund. And so I want to end our conversation not talking about the pastor's sinking fund, but talking about the church's sinking fund. So would you mind, Andy, talking for a few moments about what a sinking fund is and why it's so important in the life of a local church?
Yeah, a sinking fund is really just a savings account for large expenses that a church is going to encounter, usually associated with its property. So, for example, a roof or a parking lot or mechanical systems. And a sinking fund is just a way of putting aside money for a number of years so that when these systems need to be replaced, it's not a financial crisis. So many churches operate without any savings, and then the roof needs to be replaced, and it's an immediate financial crisis that they don't have any way to handle. And we all know that roofs aren't going to last forever. When you put a new roof on, you can just count down 20 years, you're going to need to do it again. So you've got plenty of time to save. So a sinking fund is a way of being prepared for these predictable, high cost expenses so they don't become a financial crisis or burden for the church.
Yeah. Now, here's what we all know. Some of us, I don't know, there are people that make $20,000 and people that make $200,000, right? And I know it's much larger than this, but it's just a couple of zero. I mean, it's just a zero, right? And I think one of the things is that I think what happens when pastors think of a sinking fund, they just immediately assume, oh yeah, if I was a huge church, I could do that. Well, it's not easy for a big church to do it any more than it is for a small church to do it. Andy, would you mind talking for just a second? When you became the treasurer of the local church that you attend, what was the financial condition of that church, if you don't mind? Just give us some summary of what it was like.
Yeah, it was a large old building that had a lot of long-term maintenance needs and virtually no savings. And so it was going to be impossible for the church, my church, to be able to save the amount it needed in a very short period of time. What I would encourage pastors is start somewhere. You may not be able to start and save as much money as you want, but start by putting a little bit aside, and next year put a little bit more aside, and just start somewhere so that you don't have zero when that roof needs to be replaced, when the parking lot's falling apart, when your furnace dies. Start somewhere. We can't control where we're at today, but we can control what we do in the future. And so I just encourage them to start somewhere. And if you want some tools or some resources to help you or your board figure out what you should be doing, I welcome your call. We've got some things that can be helpful for churches. But again, even if it's not everything that you need to be, starting with something small is better than not doing anything.
Yeah, that's awesome. Dave, I'm going to allow you the last word here. As a layperson who has sat in a church. Now, I happen to know that you've been a very positive influence. You haven't been a negative, you've been a very positive influence at your local church. But as a layperson, as you kind of look at the landscape of churches, are there any common mistakes that you see churches make? Just as you talked about some mistakes that you see in our last episode that you see individuals make, are there any common mistakes that you see churches make? Or organizations make, yeah.
Sure. Chris, I think back to when I first joined the finance committee at my local church.
Okay.
And I can still picture looking at the clock on the wall, and it was about 10 minutes to midnight.
Oh my goodness.
And we were in the midst of a debate about the nursery budget and whether or not we wanted to strike the line item for sugary snacks, because these kids shouldn't be having sugary snacks. And I remember thinking, there has got to be a better way. There's just got to be a better way. And fortunately, we were able to build a committee and to bring some people on board, both lay people and a great business manager, and to begin to think about it differently. Yeah. And so I always look at it and say, build a good finance committee, which looks like people that have financial skills and ministry heart.
Wow.
And then spend some time grappling with, how do I, as a numbers guy, think about faith? And one of the most impactful moments on that journey for me, I was having a conversation with our business manager at a time that our church was undertaking a huge building project. Okay. And I think ultimately we ended up with $9 million of debt related to this project. And that was lower than what our projections had said. I mean, that was good news, but it wasn't good news. Yeah. But as we were talking about what to do and what to spend and the numbers and all that, and I had just said to him, I wonder what it would have been like to be the finance committee for Moses on the front end of the Exodus. Of you're going to do what and how many people and what's your budget for this and where's your revenue? And there are times where you just have to default to the Spirit's leadership and let God provide. But there are also times that people use that as an invalid excuse to do things that aren't wise. Right. And finding a group of financial individuals that can help you understand sort of the pros and cons of different choices, and can journey with you with that godly heart is huge.
Yeah, it sure is. Thank you so much, Dave. Thanks so much, Andy, for being with us. You know, today's episode went longer than any of our other episodes, and I think what that just shows is the fact that there is so much that we can talk about. And so I'm sure this will just lead to other VCasts and podcasts of the Spirit Anointed Leadership Podcast and VCasts that we will make, because we just want to serve you. There's just so many aspects of the financial reality that so many pastors and churches find themselves in. Really hope that this has been helpful for you. If it has, do me a favor, will you? Would you just subscribe? Just push the subscribe button, and then would you share it with people around you so that we can spread the news to other people and hopefully help them as well? And finally, would you send in comments and suggestions to us about how we can serve you as we put out this podcast and VCast? This is yours, and we want to serve you well with it. Thanks so much for joining us. Can't wait to be with you again for our next episode. Have an awesome day.